Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Seventh Eye, where I answer all of your questions. If you have a question for me or for the Seventh Eye, feel free to put it below. So, the latest question. Hi, Mary. I'd like for you to talk about a healthy relationship to divination. In general, I see some of my friends are so influenced by their astrological, psychic, numerology, Akashic records, etc. And sometimes these seem to tell them very specific things they need to do and places to visit. Some give them insights that make a difference. I wonder how much of this is suggestion and how much is real. Personally, I hold back a lot on receiving divination work for myself, though I know it's a real area of magic. I'd be curious to hear your take on how to use and receive divination work powerfully in the spiritual path when it becomes a crutch and how much of it is just suggestion. So, in answering this question, which is a good one, there can be a thought about context here. For example, if you are utilizing oracle cards or tarot cards, there are some people that do so with the understanding that when they put out essentially a spread, when they're reading their cards, that what they are connecting to is their own subconscious. They're essentially looking for blind spots. They're looking for connection with kind of their internal self, in order to be able to show them things that are more at a subconscious level. So basically bringing the subconscious into consciousness. There are other people that utilize divination practices with the thought that they are communing, exchanging energy with some form of spirit being or the greater universe at large. So I want to make those two very clear, even though I'm being simplistic about it, because somebody who is doing divination work with the thought of looking at their own subconscious forces and somebody who is doing divination work with the thought of being in concert in communion with a deity, some larger conceptualization of the divine or some spirit, those are going to be slightly different or sometimes even drastically different practices. However, in both of those cases, we can talk a little bit about blind spots as well as, following instructions in a way that may be very, very helpful or a way that can be entirely delusional, um, or in a kinder way, somebody who is seeking certainty in a world that many times can be uncertain. So let's talk about when divination can be really helpful. Often I teach people divination in my courses. I teach divination, and my basic thought on divination is for people to find a method of divination that they feel called to and works for them. For example, I utilize water gazing as well as mirror practices for divination quite a bit, but that has a lot to do with my own spiritual inclinations. I rarely use cards these days, although I have been interested in Lenormand and, oracle cards and all that sort of fun stuff in the past. I'm certainly not an expert on them, but still have a few few decks for when I want to pull them out. So I will make clear that I think that it is very important when somebody is doing divination to find the correct divination tool for them, basically what works and what doesn't. And this is very much a trial and error thing, as well as what somebody is attracted to, naturally has an inclination towards, because in a healthy divination practice, you are forming a relationship You are forming a relationship with the bowl you are using for scrying. You are creating a relationship with the cards you are looking at with a deck of cards. You are developing a relationship with the sky if you are doing moon gazing or other practices, including astrological practices. And so I would say that the healthiest forms of divination are forms of divination where you feel connected and you treat that divination source as, depending on your container, either as a look at possible forces in your subconscious that you should be aware of, or really good guidance from a particular mentor or a particular energy or being that has a different perspective or a different consciousness than you do. So a different vantage point on your life, on your question, that sort of stuff. In either case, there is well, before I go into fallibility, I will say that in a healthy relationship, any of that stuff is sort of taken with a grain of salt. Even if the most exalted being in all of the universe is telling you to move somewhere, there should be a taking in of that information and thinking about on a pragmatic, logical level if that works for them, if that is something that they could actually do in their lives, if that is good advice for them. Because I will share that I have worked with so many different consciousness, so many different beings, and some of them are quite different than human reality. And so some of them may have thoughts or bring along guidance through the forms of divination that I utilize, or just kind of in general communicate with me, but they haven't lived human lives. And so their awareness of things like a mortgage, rent, car payment, work, the practicalities of human life may be lacking. Even in the case if we're talking about somebody who doesn't believe in spirits at all and is purely skeptical, in a healthy relationship, I'll just use oracle cards just as an example. But in a healthy relationship, what will happen is that they will do their divination, they will look at the cards, understand the meanings, but still understand two important things. That when they are putting this, when they are doing divination, it is one moment in time. And that means that tomorrow, if they were to ask the same question, the response may be different. 5 minutes later, they may do the response. They may do a spread and the response may be different. In some cases, it may be the same. There are certain, forms of divination or looking at human nature that are more fixed or more understanding of human nature, human personality, human destiny, that sort of stuff over time. But if we were talking about a healthy way to relate, the thought in my mind would be looking at this as important and possibly relevant information and taking it in or taking in what works for you. When we are talking about doing divination, there is always the human element, and that means that the reader you are going to has certain biases, certain ways of seeing reality, and that's going to play out in the divination method that they are utilizing. There is also a very human element that I go into in my book, Managing Psychic Abilities, which is that people going for divination may want to hear what they want to hear, and people who do divination professionally tend to move towards that a bit more than offering them clarity. Because as I can tell you, sometimes when you offer people clarity, what will happen is that they will not like it. There's a reason, there are a couple reasons that I stopped offering readings, and one of them was that I very much am not the type of person that will tell people what they want to hear. And so that can very much be a factor if you were going to somebody else for divination. Um, and this may not be malicious in any way. It may be anything from that the person needs to make a living to that the person has their own like subconscious biases and way of seeing reality that is transmitted into the cards, into the session without their awareness. And so even if we're talking about stuff and we're talking about, looking at different lifetimes, looking at an astrological chart or something like that. A healthy way of looking at these things is important and interesting information. What tends to happen with people, though, is that we have a very human need to crave certainty in an uncertain world. And so what happens is that in an unhealthy way, people go in to divination methods, seeking information to sort of prop themselves up or to hear what they want to hear, which I've already gone over. But their minds can become sort of fixated and locked in on whatever method, whatever way of seeing reality that this offers. And it creates a sort of tunnel vision in which they ignore everything else. And all of a sudden, everything is about, I'll just pick something like human design, or I am an INFP, or, like all whatever methods of, some of those are more methods of, discussing human personality than necessarily astrological chart, but I'm sure we've all heard, I'm a Taurus, with a Leo ascendant, and that is why I act like this. And it can feel comforting to be able to have information regarding our deeper nature. But what happens with that comfort is that we start looking for certainty, which isn't going to happen with any form of divination. And we start, which is the greatest danger, offering our own power and authority to an external source. And again, going back to my thoughts at the beginning, for example, people who are reading cards, they may be reading them with the thought of, oh, this is coming from my own subconscious, or, oh, this is me in contact with some sort of being energy, the universe at large. In either case, there is a danger of moving from this is helpful information, let me take from this what works for me, into the terrain of giving personal power and authority away. And so the person believing that something is coming from their own subconscious, they may be utilizing the cards as, giving their power and authority away over to the cards themselves. And seeking continual reassurance when any form of anxiety arises, any form of desire for control, desire for certainty. Again, very human needs, but there can be a thought on a spiritual level of what would happen if I were to sit with things, to sit with my desire for certainty, to sit with even my desire to give my authority away, to sit with my need for control. All of these are very deep spiritual topics. And if we are willing to sit with these things and to feel them, what happens is that our anxiety-based reassurance seeking, which tends to be a part of divination, tends to naturally fall away. I will also say that when we're talking about somebody who, for example, is reading cards because they believe they're communing with the larger universe at all, overall, or a specific deity or energy being, something like that, that there again is a danger in offering power, giving power away of choice, of decision making, of inner authority, offering that to something outside of ourselves. I truly believe and understand that we need teachers, we need divination methods, we need the universe, we need all sorts of things to show us our blind spots, to show us where we need growth, to teach us, to guide us, to help us, to assist us in so many different ways. But ultimately, the spiritual path is very much about utilizing those resources to gain a sense of inner power, to gain a sense of inner intuition in which we feel a confidence within ourselves, in which we are no longer offering our power away, in which we are no longer looking for a spiritual mother, father outside of ourselves, in which we develop our own light, our own capacity within ourselves. And so I will share that I use divination a lot less than I used to because, I don't have that anxiety-based like need for control anymore. But I still use it sometimes because it's helpful to have information. It is helpful to commune with certain energies that have difficulty coming through kind of in the human sphere, and it's sometimes just like sort of I treat it like reading a book from somebody who has much different insights, a much different experience of reality than me, that it is interesting and helpful to receive information that comes from a mind that or a consciousness that is unlike my own. So, just to recap, in a healthy way, divination can really allow for us to understand ourselves on a deeper level and to be another resource, mentor, more information that can help for us to make informed decisions in our lives. It becomes unhealthy when we start offering our power up to it, we start offering our authority up to it, when we may become delusional as a result of this. Think of how many people think that God is telling them to do something, and it's really their own mind, their own desires that are telling them to do something. Or how many people walking around think that they are the reincarnation of Jesus. That sort of stuff is easy to kind of point out. Um, but in a lot of cases, it tends to be milder than that, where people could stand to possibly sit with uncertainty, with anxiety, with control issues, with feelings of shame, fear, anger, all of that sort of stuff, and develop their own authority, develop their own light, and sit with uncomfortable feelings in order to be able to embody them instead of sort of projecting them outwards onto a divination method. So, great question. I hope that that helped, or at least will bring in some interesting thoughts and perspectives, and feel free to share below.